Good afternoon and welcome to today's inService podcast series segment. My name is John Carroll. I'm the CEO and founder of the Service Council. And I'm so thrilled to be joining you today in sunny summer weather. We're getting mid-90s here in Boston, which is awesome. And I think it's a little bit warmer where my guest is. So we'll introduce our guest momentarily. Today's discussion is built around breaking the AI paradox. Adaptive guidance is the next service model. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. For those listening, thank you for joining us. Thank you for engaging on whatever channel your preference is, whether that be Spotify, YouTube, or whatever other podcast channel you get it on. Thank you. For those on LinkedIn, hello, we see you. Thank you for joining. And for those that are joining on LinkedIn, we encourage you to submit questions. We'll try and find a way to fit them into our planned Q&A here. And divert from our planned Q&A to introduce any questions for today's guest. This segment will be recorded. You can listen back to it. You can share it. I'm so incredibly pleased to be joined by Roshan Pinto. He's a new council member and a new participant that we are in the process of appointing to our advisory board on the solution partner side. I'm so thrilled to welcome him to today's discussion. He's the Senior Vice President of Manufacturing of Tavant. Roshan, a very warm welcome to today's segment.
Thank you, John. Glad to be here and looking forward to our conversation today.
Outstanding. Where's home for you? I talked about the warm climate. Where's home for you, Roshan?
Sunny Dallas. So
all right.
It's been an interesting summer. Started off, not too hot, but finally made up for Dallas weather.
Outstanding. Well, let's go ahead and jump into today's discussion. So first of all, can we start with your journey? Can you tell us a little bit about your professional background, what brought you to Tavant, and what your role is as Senior Vice President of Manufacturing?
Well, sure. It's been an interesting last couple of decades. So, I'm a graduate of industrial engineering. And then did my master's in business and information systems in Detroit. And it's been a real blessing to continue, best of both worlds with industrial engineering and information systems coming together with what I've been working on. Started my journey actually at the Federal Reserve with the check operations side of the Federal Reserve. So working night shifts, looking at how to optimize how check operations work. It was a very interesting start as an intern. And since then, been part of the manufacturing space with Tavant, joined Tavant back in 2004, and have worked right from north to the south of the country. Started in North Dakota, worked with customers everywhere from Texas to Florida, and of course on either side of the coast. But it's been a fun journey, and the whole space in and around aftermarket is changing rapidly, right? The pace used to be a very different one even a year or two ago, and now we see a whole different kind of focus and a sense of urgency. And at Tavant, my role is to essentially define what we do from a product and business development standpoint. So,
I totally agree with the pace of change that the service industry and all of enterprise business is moving at with the advent of agentic and other platforms that are really systemically changing the future of business and commerce. And I want to move into the topic of where we are in that respect, moving beyond AI assistance. And, as an organization and as a community, we've spent a lot of time talking about AI and co-pilots and agentic and all the different variations of and flavors of AI, right? And rightfully so. It's really systemically changing business right now. But I think we're approaching a more important question, and that is, how do we actually use these technologies to make people better at their jobs? We at the Service Council have been thinking about this new operating methodology called adaptive guidance, which is today's topical segment here. And the idea is that instead of simply giving someone access to information, technology should dynamically determine what guidance a person needs based on who they are, skill set, how deep they're in the know in terms of machine intelligence and other information that's informing them on what to do in the situation, but then also to try and present it to that person in the right context, whether it be modality choice and preference or channel preference, et cetera. And that this is a dynamically shaping experience for the internal worker that's delivering that service experience. From your perspective, as someone that is actually deploying these solutions, are you seeing this in the manufacturing environment? And could you comment on the concept of adaptive guidance, what it means?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different ways to call, adaptive guidance out today, right? And this whole concept of human in a loop, or, confusing the human who is in the loop with, so much information is where the challenge is, right? So, uh, if you look at AI, everyone is talking about it. Everyone talks about, agents coming in and being your new coworker. But the key is to look at what drives value for the persona in place, right? So we see, if you take the example of an adjudicator, right? So it is very tough for a warranty or claims adjudicator to sit down there and look at all this information coming in. And instead of actually helping, what we are seeing is that it is actually creating a lot more work and sometimes confusion, because what parts of this information do I use? And that's where getting into a truly a more guided approach, where the AI agent becomes not just an information disseminator, but becomes somebody or something that enables faster decisions, right? Because when you start looking at the combination of what comes in from the machine, what comes in from all the data, right? So there is far more decision making points. So having the ability to use these agents to drive these decisions rather than give a lot more information is the key.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And there's no shortage of information and data. It's about making sense of the data and putting it into a framework that can create action against the data, using the data as the means to create outcomes, successful outcomes. So I want to talk exactly about that. So knowledge management was largely about storing information. Knowledge delivery made the information easier to find and consume. Adaptive guidance takes that next step where we are dynamically orchestrating that knowledge, right? You're seeing this firsthand with manufacturers. You just talked a little bit about that. Where do you see the biggest gap between having information available and then actually helping someone make a better decision or take that right action?
Yeah. So knowledge management, the way we see it, probably even 6 months ago started as something that just looks at consolidating information from a multitude of sources, right? The ability to search and more easily find information. What we're seeing being more helpful is not so much now just the ability to find that information, but for recommendation of what to do with that information, right? So if you have a technician or someone who's submitting a claim at the dealership, looking at, say, failure codes, it is not okay to just say, hey, here are failure codes associated with this particular problem. What we are doing is taking information that is available and now trying to predict that failure code, saying that, hey, this is what is recommended based on all that information that is available. So you truly move into what we were just talking about, which is adaptive guidance, where that guidance could come from historical information. That guidance could come from just comments that the technician is putting in, because now as they fix the unit, they start talking about what they're doing, they start putting in information. Now, instead of going through that process of going through a drop down, trying to think of what needs to be done, the agent or the model that is in place is able to now recommend and move forward with the data that is there. But that's just an example of where
Yeah.
Knowledge management is morphing to true recommended approach or follow through rather than just information consolidation.
Yeah, I love that. And moving beyond rules-based guidance, right?
Yeah,
Where it's just decision tree and based on static data and moving into a dynamic environment where it's consistently
absolutely.
learning, improving, and becoming even smarter and more intelligent, which is really, really the next gen. And let's get very practical because service organizations operate in really, really complex environments, as we appreciate, and everything is becoming even more technologically enabled, products especially. And you've got equipment history, you've got warranties. You talked a little bit about that right now in terms of warranty adjudication. We're going to get to that a little bit deeper in a little bit. Contracts, parts requirements, procedure requirements, safety requirements, dealer networks. Man, it gets pretty. It's a wild west in the service environment. Talk to us a little bit about why you think service is such an interesting environment for agentic AI.
Yeah, it's so at Tavant over the last year or so, we changed our mission statement, right? And one of the biggest changes there was not just so we've always talked about trying to transform and enable customers, OEMs, suppliers, partner networks, right? That's always been part of our go-to-market approach. What is different now is the AI piece, but more important, the machine piece. So
Mm,
we have added the whole ability for AI to transform that relationship between customers, OEMs, suppliers, partners, and machines, right? Because the amount of data and information coming in uh, makes it very difficult for somebody to ignore what can now be gleaned. But the biggest challenge is first to understand which part of that information to take because you're getting millions of records, right, every few minutes. So now, how do you ensure that you find out what information is relevant? Right? And do you do that manually? Do you do that just based on the knowledge that someone has over the last 30 years? Or can you now combine what an agentic transformation can really bring in, looking at trends that all of us may not see, but an agent or a model can truly derive, right? And that's where we are seeing that combination of an agentic approach to slicing and dicing information that is relevant, correlating it to things that are coming in from the technician, matching it to the kind of historical claims that are coming in, and then clustering all this information and making it available either for the technician, available for the person submitting the claim, or available for the adjudicator who's trying to make a decision on what to do with that claim, right? So the combination of this information now and the ability to consolidate that is phenomenal, right? Something that could have taken months or sometimes years together to put all of this together could now be done in weeks.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And as we appreciate, time is not your friend when you're talking about maintaining customer experience, right? Time to value is a big, big element here. Let's talk a little bit more about that warranty adjudication process, which I think is really interesting because traditionally, warranty decisions can involve reviewing policies, equipment history, repair information, parts, labor, and parts. It's not just parts. It's like at the subcomponent unit level, that can get really tricky in terms of missing warranted items versus in or out of warranty. There's a lot to this story.
Yeah.
All of which it can require a lot of human effort, right? And so talk to us a little bit about what part of that process agentic AI can actually subordinate and where that human in the loop process, where are you finding the best marriage between human in the loop, human and technology managing that warranty adjudication?
It's very interesting in so many ways right now, John, because see, in some ways, technology has completely transformed how an educator would view information, right? But just bringing in, say, a AI model in place or an agentic process that drives, a lot more information hasn't necessarily made the life of an educator better, because now instead of having 15 decision points, they have 100, right? Because there's all of this information coming in.
Yeah.
So what we have seen as a pragmatic approach to this is the agent becoming a true recommender, right? And looking at high risk and low risk, with respect to decisions that have to be made. So that way, when the adjudicator gets, a recommendation of what needs to be done, and if a claim has to come to an adjudicator for manual review, it has already looked at everything else and gone through the risk analysis. And so the adjudicator receiving the claim is receiving claims that they truly need to review. Everything else is driven through an automated approach. Right? And that automation also requires a higher degree of confidence from the SMEs that are involved, right? So we have had customers who were at 90%, 95% automation scale back based on what these models have got them to understand, because they realize they are submitting and they're approving claims that they shouldn't, right?
Mm.
But now processors can process that additional 10% far faster because the agent is recommending different things, right? So everything with respect to what should be done have been done from a part standpoint, labor standpoint, any variation, all of that is given. And like what we were discussing earlier, from a clustering perspective, you have a cluster of claims that says, okay, these are similar claims. This is what has been done. So here is why it was sent to you for manual review. Here is the suspect score or a score of the quality of the claim. So each thing becomes more quantitative, and it drives more confidence for the adjudicator to, say, okay, yes, I can increase the degree of automation, and I do
Sure.
not need to spend a lot more time on manual review. Right?
Yeah.
And so that is the difference, right? It's not just about
Yeah.
automation or just trying to, drive data or, optimization based on what you can automate from a process standpoint,
Yeah.
but to truly make it data driven, and data driven not just from historical information. It could also be from real time information that you are deriving from diagnostic information coming in. So someone files a claim, your historical claim may say that, hey, this is the right, a claim that has come in. But then your diagnostic information may say that, hey, there is overutilization of this equipment, right? They
Mhm.
have, so based on that, this claim, may or may not be a claim that you should automate because of the degree of, utilization or how it's being used. So
Yeah, I love that. That is a great talk track. It allows the human that's in the loop to manage by exception,
yeah.
and I think that's a really good way to look at it. Um, I want to encourage our listening audience to submit any questions or comments or reactions. We welcome those, and we'll try to fit that into our time. But getting back to our planned discussion, I want to talk a little bit more about the serialized asset, the subcomponent, which I find it fascinating because the complexity of modern equipment just continues to go up. Right, a manufacturer may not just need to understand the historical perspective on an asset. They might need to understand the history of the serialized components that make up and are within that asset. How does agentic AI change what manufacturers can do at that level with, at that subcomponent level, which can be really tricky? Is it a similar process? Is there something unique to it?
So I think as you start looking at the complexity of, asset management, you start looking at, what you need to do with respect to, say, parts replacement, right?
Hmm.
And irrespective of the number of layers you have on your bill of materials, the ability to now recommend what needs to be done is significantly simpler, right? Because the
Yeah.
ability to correlate relationships has changed. In addition to that, the ability to now forecast what could be required to backfill inventory, to ensure that based on utilization patterns, you make recommendations for what can be done to avoid downtime, right?
Mhm.
So all of that also, has changed because now, as long as that information can be obtained, you are able to drive, a better behavior from asset management perspective. The challenge though with a lot of these things are, it's still down to your fundamentals and basics, right? So for
Yeah.
example, with many OEMs we work with, dealers are not comfortable sharing their inventory levels, right? And when that doesn't happen, you can have all the AI in the world, but that's not going to help you solve the problem that both the dealer and the OEM are trying to solve.
Yeah.
Now, bridging that gap and ensuring that all these disparate systems that are in place, where dealers have dealer management systems that have been out there for 20, 30 plus years, right? Now, how do you integrate into that? What gives the dealer not just the comfort, but also the confidence that they can do far more by having more information shared is where, the true challenge of transformation is. Because once
Yeah.
that happens, then the rest of it is all semantics, right? So
Yeah, that's a real interesting point you bring up about governance when you lack control of that inventory visibility across,
yeah.
all those customer touch points that are not within your control in many
Yep.
regards, right? So that can be, and that's where the customer experience can start to erode in a way that is potentially damaging. And so I appreciate the importance of that. And it actually talks a little bit more about that adaptive guidance methodology, the word adaptive, which is really critical to that. When you're designing systems in the real world, what has to happen behind the scenes for that AI experience to genuinely adapt to the person, the situation, rather than simply giving everyone the same answer? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So our let me put it a little differently. So
Sure.
it's interesting with how we started off this journey. Like I said, a year ago, when we started looking at AI agents, we were looking at what we should automate, right? How we can make things done faster, build that confidence. So that's the approach we started with. But as we started talking to our customers, we realized that it starts with first simplifying the life of any persona involved, right? So at the dealership, if you have a technician, you have a claim submitter, you have someone who's looking at parts. The same at the OEM side with the supplier admin, someone who's looking at adjudication or inspection. It's about getting down to not just automating or making things simpler for them from a process standpoint, but looking at what makes decisions faster and simpler. So, like we came up with something called a dealer assist agent. So, initially, the objective of that dealer assist was to automate a lot of the claim submission process. But what the dealer actually needed was the ability to understand all different parts that would go into submitting that claim. So they didn't really want to automate the claim submission. They wanted policy information, job code information. They wanted historical or clustering or similar kind of claim information, all available through a conversational approach. So instead of going and looking at multiple sources, and there are multiple sources for this data, right?
Yeah.
It would be amazing if everything was in one place, but that's not how a dealer ecosystem or an OEM's ecosystem works. So now giving that guided approach where you are adapting the guidance based on the persona, not just based on a larger business problem, is where
Yeah.
we believe the differentiator is. So
I love it. I love it. Can you give us some real world examples of what it looks like for the people actually doing the work in terms of whether it be a warranty adjudicator or an intake or a field technician, field engineer? Can you talk a little bit about how that manifests itself?
yeah, if you look at just the life cycle of say a claim coming in, right? So Now, when a technician completes the job, the ability for them to say, okay, now what do I do with this? What was done historically with it? The recommended set of actions is all being done by the agent right now, right?
Mhm.
So the technician gets that information. They are now completing the work order. Now, they typically what we have seen is they start finding a claim, or they submit that work order, and someone at the dealership sits and now manually creates the claim. All of that process is now slowly going away because that work order has all the information required and the claim is automatically generated. Now, when someone at the dealership starts looking at that claim and they need to submit it to the OEM system is already validating a lot of that information, saying, yes, based on everything we have from a policy perspective, from a job code perspective, number of labor hours, all of that is already pre validated, right? So
Mhm.
now the probability of that claim being accepted is really high, right? And if we are integrated into the dealer system, the dealer does not have to resubmit that claim on the dealer system and the OEM system, right? There's an agent that converts everything, creates a draft if they require, or they can directly submit the claim. The claim now comes into the OEM, the adjudicator, the processor is looking at it. In most cases, now 80 to 90% of it is already taken care of through either a model that is in place that says, okay, let me score the quality of this claim. If the score is, 85, 90 plus, the claim goes through. If it is less, there is a risk to this claim. There is all the risk associated with the claim. And, the educator is able to go and review that and send information back to the dealer, right? So this entire process now is, optimized from what used to take a week or more to, a few hours, right? But the key, like I mentioned earlier, is to ensure that it's not just an information overload, it's a risk analysis update, right? So,
Yeah.
because you don't want your processor taking the same amount of time to, review that claim, you want them to be doing far more with that information they're receiving. Same thing with the technician, same thing with, the claim reviewer at the dealership. Yeah.
Yeah, we that's a great talk track there, Roshan. We continue to hear um, organizations still taking the approach of experimentation with AI, which is something that has been happening over the last several years as with the rise of its popularity. And in some regards, you can appreciate the approach of experimentation and trialing a use case, a singular use case, before thinking about it more systemically. The whole think big, start small methodology. Um, I I tend to lean more on the other side of the argument, which is, okay, we need to think big and go big. Um, how are you seeing manufacturers think about AI, and if they're starting their journey, what approach are they taking that you've seen that has been successful?
I think the ones who are going through the pain want to think big and act big, right?
Yeah, yeah,
The ones who have to resolve that pain want to start small and only think big, right? And that's the irony of or the reality of what we face, right? And I don't think there is any clear one size fits all with this. We come across customers who are far more open to taking a bigger risk with the confidence they have in their processes and their data, right? And with what is available right now, the ability to convert a good idea or the right kind of process into reality has
hmm,
changed, right?
yep,
So like Tavant came up with the Tavant platform over the last few weeks, where we combine our product piece along with just custom work that folks may want to do with a bunch of AI agents for even software development. right? So now you're not just talking about prepackaged product lines, but the ability to convert what you may have as an idea that may not be in a product line, but you want to go put a specification document together, and based on your spec doc, you're able to convert your idea into something real, right? Now, the challenge is to back that something real with a strong underlying, framework and plumbing that does all the basic foundational pieces to you, right? So you are no longer tied to large monolithic, year 3 to 5 year deployment cycles to convert what you have as an idea.
Yeah.
So we are seeing customers who are training, you know, the business teams from, to be more familiar with vibe coding, to understand what it means to convert a specification document to reality. And that is what we're being asked, right? The ask of, do you have everything that we need, I think is going away. The ask is changing to, can you adapt fast enough to what we may need today? And our need may change, 1 month from now, not 1 year from now, right?
Yeah.
So based on the feedback that's coming in, based on the information and data that's coming in from the equipment that is probably sitting, in -4 degrees in North Dakota, or 115 in Arizona, right? Now we have to change and put something out there very quickly so that the dealer can, submit, say, a claim that gives information that you typically may not get, right?
Yeah.
Or you may have a large rental company that is helping out with a disaster recovery situation, right? There's a storm, there is, a problem, and they have to send 200 pieces of, excavators to help with the situation. Now, the ability to change what the system, the product, the platform does, you can change that in days, right? And that's the opportunity, right? The ability
Love
to very quickly change from
it. Love
thought to actual reality.
it. Great overview, and that adaptive approach, to continue to use that word in terms of transformation, is depending on the scenario, depending on the culture, depending on the maturity of the organization, depending on the complexity of the enterprise tech stack, which is another critical part of it. I heard a podcast recently. Rajiv Mehta, he formerly led service for Samsung, and he was a board member of the Service Council at our inception almost 20 years ago, and now he's with Amazon. And he talked about the concept of how Amazon introduces new products and capabilities, and they go through a PR FAQ, which is before pre-announcement, they have to go through the motions of as if they were launching the press release, and what frequently asked questions they'd get from their customers. And I love it because when you're going through transformation and change management, you need to think about a pre-mortem methodology instead of a post-mortem methodology, right? What are the encountered, things that you're going to step in as a result of this change, right? So effective change management, I think, is really changing it to a pre-mortem methodology. And I love that viewpoint that Rajiv offered in his recent podcast. And on that complexity of the enterprise stack, I want to ask you a follow-up question, which is, does all of the above, what we're talking about, does it require the replacement of the enterprise tech stack? What are your viewpoints on that?
No, not the way it used to be, right? So I think it does require a rethink, but the ability to connect into an existing tech stack, make things available like it never was before, consolidating information, giving a guided path from that information, is really based on the combination of, both historical data available and the knowledge, we put in, right? So the ability to now convert what could be a legacy, system out there is a very different one, right? So we are working with customers where we essentially talk through a path of modernizing legacy systems in the matter of months. right? So you look at a legacy system that's been out there for years together or decades, and now you're able to convert that into what is a reverse specification document. And based on additional information that you come up with, you recreate a whole new stack, right? So that is one part of reducing your legacy footprint. But even if you don't want to do that, the ability to connect models and agents into systems that exist today is far more easier than it was before. I don't want to sugarcoat it, but yeah, it is definitely not as complex as it was even a year ago, right? So
Outstanding. Well, it's a good conversation when we go over our time, Roshan. So thank you for spending some additional time with us for our planned time here. And as we close out today's discussion, I'm so pleased to be able to announce your appointment to our advisory board. Wealth of experience, and that experience will be a great resource for our community moving forward. So congratulations and thank you for committing to our organization and community. I look forward to continuing to tap your deep expertise for the benefit of all. But for our listening audience, perhaps you could share something with you about yourself personally, or something that you're looking forward to for them to get to know you a little bit better outside of work.
well, found a newfound love for cooking. And yeah, so that's been fun, and love to
Awesome.
do that with my daughters. And then gardening, right? So
Ah,
my wife is an amazing gardener, and she's the SME. I'm the AI agent who gives a lot of information, but it is practical only when she applies what she knows based on Texas weather. So it's been amazing. Yeah, we've tried to do a lot of things in our backyard, and it's truly been a journey with gardening. So yeah,
that's
it's
outstanding. It
fun.
sounds like a
Yeah.
consistent thread of domestication happening on your side,
Oh,
which is great. And I have to deploy adaptive guidance when I try to cook. So that's a good overview. Thanks for sharing with our
yeah.
audience, Roshan. Thank you for
Yeah.
joining. Congratulations on your board appointment. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much.
Today's segment has been brought to you by Tavant. Thank you. Please feel free to learn more about Tavant by visiting their website. Roshan is a willing connector as well on LinkedIn, and willing to share their viewpoints in greater depth. So I encourage you to engage. Today's podcast is available for consumption moving forward. If you want to share it with colleagues, you can find it on whatever your channel you subscribe to. We want to thank you for joining. Have a great rest of the summer. Roshan, thank you for joining us today. This was a great one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. Take care.